He's the most high-profile witness of the trial so far, and today Minneapolis Police Chief Madera Arredondo did not mince words.
I absolutely agree that violates our policy.
Arredondo, the city's first black police chief, eviscerated Derek Chauvin, the officer he fired for kneeling on George Floyd's neck for about 9.5 minutes.
Once there was no longer any resistance, and clearly when Mr. Floyd was no longer responsive and even motionless, to continue to apply that level of force to a person proned out, handcuffed behind their back, that in no way, shape, or form is anything that is by policy, is not part of our training, and it is certainly not part of our ethics or our values.
During that testimony, Chauvin took notes and only looked up briefly. Arredondo also revealed that he'd first gotten a call about the incident that night around 9 p.m. before Floyd had been pronounced dead. He told jurors he initially viewed this video from across the street and nothing jumped out at him. It wasn't until around midnight that a community member told him about the bystander cell phone video that soon went viral.
Thank you so much.
Arredondo had been blunt when we spoke with him last summer.
If you could look and be in the same room with Derek Chauvin, what would you say to him?
I would not be in the same room with him, and I refuse to mention his name.
Today's testimony was extremely rare.
I've been in and out of policing for over 40 years, and this is the first time in the history of my career that I've ever seen a chief that take the stand as a witness against one of his or her police officers.
Chauvin's defense team has argued that an angry crowd of bystanders distracted the officers and that Floyd died because of his drug use and underlying health conditions.
Would you agree that the use of force is not an attractive notion?
I would say that use of force is something that most officers would rather not use, yes.
Today, the ER doctor who pronounced Floyd dead told the jury that he believed Floyd died not from drugs, but from a lack of oxygen.
Is there another name for death by oxygen deficiency?
Asphyxia.
A crucial debate in this trial that both sides will keep arguing when the county medical examiner testifies, possibly later this week.
And Gabe, the defense also asked for new body camera video to be admitted into evidence. What's that about?
Yes, Lester, the defense wants jurors to see more of Chauvin's body camera video. The judge agreed to allow some, but not all, Lester.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.
Did you consider the possibility of toxins, for example, being responsible for Mr. Floyd's cardiac arrest, including potentially drugs?
In the sense that it might have informed our care, yes. I didn't, there was, again, no report that this patient had, for example, overdosed on a specific medication, such as calcium channel blocker or any other medication for which there might be a very specific antidote. And so in that sense, I didn't feel that there was a specific toxin that we could give a medication for that would readily reverse his arrest.
And what about then hypoxia?
So hypoxia being, again, one of the most common causes of PEA asystole just in general. I did then, as I'd mentioned, use the ultrasound to look in the abdomen and did not see any evidence of hemorrhage. There was no obvious significant external trauma that would have suggested that he suffered anything that could produce bleeding sufficient to lead to a cardiac arrest. And so, based on the history that was available to me, I felt that hypoxia was one of the more likely possibilities.
And hypoxia as an explanation for his cardiac arrest, meaning oxygen insufficiency.
Correct.
Did you have any other leading theories as to why Mr. Floyd's heart may have stopped other than oxygen deficiency?
Yes. I also considered an acidosis, in particular excited delirium, which is a controversial diagnosis, but it was in the differential in this case.
And were you able to make any assessments about so-called excited delirium based on your examination of Mr. Floyd?
Again, the patient had been in cardiac arrest for 30 minutes. It can be difficult based on the examination. Certainly there was no report that the patient was ever very sweaty, which is often the case when thinking about excited delirium. There was no report that the patient had ever been, that Mr. Floyd had ever been extremely agitated. In my experience, seeing a lot of cases of mental health crises or drug use leading to severe agitated states, that is almost always reported by paramedics. And so the absence of that information was telling, and that I didn't have any reason to believe that that was the case here.
So how long was Mr. Floyd in your care in the emergency department?
Approximately 30 minutes.
And at the end of the 30 minutes, did you pronounce him formally dead?
Yes.
At the time you pronounced him dead, was he still in some degree in PEA or asystole in terms of describing his heart?
I think it's probably best to think of these as sort of a spectrum where PEA is some degree of electrical activity still running through the heart, but the heart's not pumping. And then eventually that will devolve into asystole, where both the heart is not pumping and then the electrical activity stops as well. And so at the end of the case, Mr. Floyd was still in PEA, but there was virtually no cardiac activity. And at that point, in the absence of any apparent reversible cause, and because Mr. Floyd had been in arrest for, by this time, 60 minutes, I determined that the likelihood of any meaningful outcome was far below 1%, and that we would not be able to resuscitate Mr. Floyd, and so I then pronounced him dead.
And doctor, was your leading theory then for the cause of Mr. Floyd's cardiac arrest oxygen deficiency?
That was one of the more likely possibilities. I felt that at the time, based on the information I had, it was more likely than the other possibilities.
And doctor, is there another name for death by oxygen deficiency?
Asphyxia is a commonly understood term.
That was a very key moment here. Not only did you learn that it was a total of about 60 minutes that George Floyd was under cardiac arrest, but the more likely possibility that actually caused that cardiac arrest, doctor was very careful to say, was hypoxia, loss or deprivation of oxygen. And colloquially, what is that? Asphyxia, asphyxiation. We have a link here through the testimony now, Kate, that suggests that the person who ultimately declared George Floyd dead and tried to save his life in the ER was eliminating possibilities based on what the paramedics did not tell him. A very telling moment was the idea of, hey, if drugs had been an issue, if overdosing had been suspected, if the person's behavior indicated that that was a possibility, wouldn't the paramedics have said that? In his experience, yes, they often offer that information. The absence of that information allowed him to eliminate a number of possibilities and say, with quite clearly there, that he believed that the most dead-on possibility, and forgive the pun, the most appropriate possibility that caused that cardiac arrest here was the loss of oxygen.
You were discussing hypoxia kind of being consistent with asphyxiation, right?
Correct.
Hypoxia is the lack of oxygen to the brain, correct?
Correct.
Right. And there are many things that cause hypoxia, that would still be considered asphyxiation. Agreed?
Correct.
Drug use. Certain drugs can cause hypoxia. Agreed?
Yes.
Specifically fentanyl.
That's correct.
How about methamphetamine?
It can.
Combination of the two?
Yes.
During the course of your care of Mr. Floyd, you did not administer Narcan or naloxone, did you?
No.
And when you talk about those drugs that are immediately able to reverse the effects, that's what that does. Narcan reverses the effects of fentanyl toxicity. Agreed?
Correct.
When someone has a high carbon dioxide level, that causes that person to have a sensation of shortness of breath. Agreed?
Yes.
And that can happen to a person even without stress complicating their body, right? That respiratory, that feeling of an inability to breathe.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the impact of taking certain narcotics interrectally? Rectally?
Yes.
And that ultimately can provide a more powerful or rapid onset of an impact, right?
Yes.
Simply because a person has a history of chronic opiate abuse, does that mean that fentanyl can't kill them?
No.
When someone is hyperventilating, anxious and hyperventilating, they're actually decreasing their CO2 by doing that, correct?
Correct.
Laura Coates, as we go through this cross-examination now, the defense attorney is trying to raise some doubts about why George Floyd died. Could have been fentanyl in his system. Well, what did you take away from the questioning just there?
Well, this is they're actually trying to mount a better defense than we've seen them be able to do so in the last week. They're trying to suggest that fentanyl can also mimic the same things that George Floyd was experiencing: shortness of breath, the failure of the respiratory system. In fact, the ER doctor has been able to say that fentanyl can also lead to asphyxia. Drug use can also lead to asphyxia because it can also mimic that feeling of not being able to breathe, and it's why it's so dangerous. They also got him to talk about, and he's very matter-of-fact in his presentation. You don't get the idea that he's having the teeth pulled to get the information out. He's being very forthright about that and being very objective in his presentation of evidence, which buttresses his credibility for a jury. But you have very powerful testimony now from somebody, again, no agenda, was the person to declare George Floyd dead, saying that, yes, fentanyl could be one of the things that mimics the same sort of shortness of breath. Now, whether that's going to be able to blow out of the water what Minnesota law requires, which is it doesn't have to be the sole cause of death. It must be a substantial causal factor of death. There can be many.
And so that, Cedric Alexander, is what we're watching play out. That's the drama of a trial. The prosecution trying to make the case through this medical testimony. And the testimony may be about to resume. I'm just going to watch for 1 second.
Yes.
Here we go.
Okay, it's my understanding that the deputy seized it because you were taking pictures on the 18th floor.
Yeah, I was in the elevator bank. Didn't know I couldn't take a picture. I apologize. I apologized to him then. I'm sorry, I didn't know.
What's your connection to this case?
I'm here with Miss Frazier and her attorneys and her mother.
I'm sorry?
I'm here with Darnella Frazier and her attorneys and her mother.
Okay, are you a family member or?
No. Spokesman, family media representative. I've been keeping the press off of her.
Okay. So you're a media representative?
Yeah.
Are you?
A PR person. I've been managing the media for Darnella Frazier.
I understood. Keeping
them at bay, not allowing her to do interviews, just keeping her out of the public sphere.
Understood. What was the purpose of taking photographs in a secured area?
So the Attorney General was talking to her, and I just took a picture to memorialize it for her so she can look back on it one day. That's all. Not for public consumption, for sure.
If you're a media representative, it's very important you understand that courthouses have very strict rules about cameras.
Right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know better than to disobey a judge's order.
I'll chalk this up to that you were not aware of the order.
I wasn't aware.
I think you should, in the future, remember that all courthouses have very strict rules against cameras. The rules that allow cameras in this trial for broadcast were very restrictive, very detailed, because we do not allow cameras to be taken even on less than high-profile trial.
Yeah.
Cameras are not allowed up in the government center tower. They are definitely not allowed on a secured floor like this. I am actually asking that you must delete the picture.
Oh, I offered to do that.
And recall any places you have posted it.
Oh, no, I haven't posted it.
So why don't you come up here and I'll give you your phone back.
Okay.
Please advise anybody who else might be thinking of doing this not to do it.
No, I will.
It's a lesson learned. We'll leave it at
Yep.
that. Come on up and I'll give you this back. Well, I understood.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.
What did you see?
Thanks for watching.
The officer on Mr. Floyd, what was the relation of their two bodies? What was happening there?
George was motionless, limp, and Chauvin seemed he was in a resting state, meaning like he just rested his knee on his neck.
And what did you do when you saw that?
I pulled my phone out first and I called my mom and told her not to come downstairs, and then I started recording.
And did you make a recording?
Correct.
Did you keep that recording?
No.
Why not?
Later on that night, I deleted it because when they picked George up off of the ground, the ambulance went straight on 38th instead of going straight on Chicago. And if you live in South Minneapolis, the easiest way to get to the hospital would have been straight on Chicago. So that to me kind of made it like clear that he was no longer with us.
So you thought he had died?
Correct.
Not quite sure why that would, make you delete the video.
Oh, I just didn't want to have to show it to anyone. I'd be questioned about it.
And so after you called your mom, you started taking a video, what did you do after that?
I was recording until one of my coworkers was pushed by an officer.
And so what had you seen the coworker do right before the push?
He was yelling at the officer, kind of how the other people in the crowd were doing, and asking them to check his pulse, if he's breathing, see if he's okay, kind of thing.
So did he leave the sidewalk, the curb area, and go onto the road?
Correct.
Okay. How far?
I do not recall.
This coworker of yours that got pushed, do you know how old he was that day?
I do not recall.
Is he older or younger than you?
Younger.
So, a teenager.
Correct.
And after he got pushed, did you see what happened to him or what became of him?
Yes. My other coworker just grabbed him up and brought him inside.
So removed him from the scene?
Correct.
And prior to coming into court, did we show you a security video from Cup Foods that shows that area?
Correct.
And that area while you were out there?
Correct.
And did that appear to depict truly and accurately the time period during which you were out there during this incident?
Correct.
And Your Honor, I'd offer then what we've marked as Exhibit 33.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
33 is received.
All right, so now I'm going to start showing Exhibit 33, and we may pause this like we had done the other videos, all right? I'm going to pause it right here for a moment. you recognize this scene?
Correct.
And this is you in the foreground, right?
Correct.
And what were you doing right at that moment?
That was when I was calling my mom to tell her not to come down the stairs.
And if you were to come down the stairs, this is where you were living, correct?
Correct.
Is the door she would have come out, would that have been in this scene?
Correct.
Can you take that stylus and just show where that door would be?
It would swing open right here.
So if she had come down, she'd have come right into this scene, correct?
Correct.
Right. And then you talked about a coworker who was younger than you who came out. Is that the individual in the white t-shirt?
Correct.
All right. And, okay, so then we will continue to run Exhibit 33, please. I'm going to pause it right here, please. For the record, this is 8:28:34. And can you describe for the jurors what you're doing at this moment?
I was recording the scene.
So this, you had walked farther over towards the scene?
Correct.
And really by the door where your mom would have come out if she had come out?
Correct.
And the individual in the white t-shirt, he had stepped off the curb into the street here, correct?
Correct.
All right. And so then let's continue to run Exhibit 33, please. And we're going to pause right there, please, at 8:28:41. Is that the moment you were talking about when your coworker got pushed?
Correct.
And did you see it all anywhere in there where he touched the police officer?
No.
And so then you are now standing around behind that group of people, correct?
Correct.
Did you know anybody in that crowd?
My two coworkers.
All right. So right now, if you could just put like a line or a dot on where your two coworkers are. And both of those are individuals who went out during the second trip to the SUV, correct?
Correct.
And did you know any of the other people there in the crowd at the time?
Not at the time.
Okay. Did you know Miss Funari?
I think. Yes.
Do you know Alyssa Funari?
Yes.
And was she there at the time?
Correct.
Do you see where she is now?
Correct.
All right. And how did you know her?
Just through school.
And all right, so then let's continue to run Exhibit 33, please. I'm going to stop right here, please. Can you describe for the jurors and what we're seeing, what's going on there in that segment of the video?
That was when one of the coworkers kind of grabbed up the other coworker and brought him back inside, and I was just yelling like, "Chill out, chill out, chill out."
And so when his coworkers came to get the young man in the white T-shirt, he went with them back into the store.
Correct.
And you were following them?
Correct.
All right, so let's continue to run 33 then. Now I want to pause here for a moment, please. For the record, 8:29:04. Can you tell the jurors what happened, what you were doing here, I guess?
At this point, I think I was just kind of emotional. and I went to the African American that was standing there in the curb, and I was just like they're not gonna help him. This is what we have to deal with. So.
Okay.
Sustained.
Yeah,
He'll be stricken.
That's fine. So you had a conversation with another person standing there.
Correct.
And when you walked up there, we saw just before I stopped it, there was a young girl there in a green shirt. Did you see her when you were walking up there?
Correct.
You remember seeing her in the store earlier?
Correct.
Did you know who she was?
No.
And you remember being the cashier when she was in the store earlier?
Correct.
And then can we continue to run Exhibit 33, please? I'm going to pause here for a moment. The record should reflect 8:29:55. We saw you standing there with your hands on your head for a while, correct?
Correct.
What was going through your mind during that time period?
Disbelief.
Direct your attention
Thank
to
you.
May 25th, Memorial Day of last year. Were you on duty as a paramedic with Hennepin EMS on that date?
I was.
And was there a call that you responded to that evening in the area of 38th and Chicago?
Yes.
What was the nature of that call? How did you become aware of it?
We were dispatched. We have our screen where we get our calls on. We were dispatched, and our notes said we were going code 2 for someone with a mouth injury, and PD was on scene.
And when you say code 2, what does code 2 mean?
Routine, so no lights or sirens, normal driving.
So you said routine, no lights or sirens. Does that, what does that indicate to you in terms of the criticality or how serious that call might be?
It'd be pretty low criticality.
Okay,
yeah.
so-
No life-threatening indication if we're going code 2.
Okay. Where were you coming from when you heard about this code 2?
We were downtown at HCMC when we got it.
And did you get into your ambulance at that time, assuming you were responding to a code 2 call?
Yeah, I believe we were already in it, but
Okay.
yes.
Did the nature of that call or did the code level of that call change at some point?
It did about a minute and a half after we got it, I believe.
And what was the change?
We got a note saying code 3, so upgraded to lights and sirens, emergent response to the scene.
Okay. And at that point in time, did you have any more information about what the code 3 was?
No, not at that point.
So did you proceed as if, while you were en route, did you then upgrade in terms of your response to a code 3?
Yes.
Meaning, did you turn on the lights and sirens?
Yep.
Okay. And ultimately, did you arrive at that location, the 38th and Chicago location?
We did.
What did you see when you arrived on scene?
As we were pulling up to the scene, I saw multiple officers on the side of the road with our patient lying on the ground next to a squad car.
So, as you were pulling up, was that the position that you observed them in, meaning the officers on top of the patient next to the squad car?
Yes.
Could you tell at that point, as you were approaching, what the situation was, or what the condition of the patient was at that moment?
No, there were multiple officers on top of the patient when we pulled up at that point. We assumed, I assumed that there was potentially some struggle still because they were still on top of him. So
Okay.
that was my assumption when we pulled up.
So when you got to the scene, having no additional information, seeing what you saw, that's what was going through your mind, is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
So when you got to the scene, what did you do next?
Parked the ambulance near the patient and got out. I walked to the back of the ambulance and my partner walked over to check on the patient.
And what did you see when you got out of the ambulance in terms of the patient's condition at that point?
I was standing a little ways away, so I couldn't get my partner would have had a more accurate description of his condition at that point. But from what I could see where I was at, I didn't see any breathing or movement or anything like that.
Did he appear to be unresponsive to you at that point in time?
From what I could tell, just standing from a distance, yes.
And was he in handcuffs?
Yes.
And we're describing the patient here. Was that patient later identified as George Floyd?
Yes.
So when you got out, your partner first approached, is that right? What were you doing at that initial point in time when you first got there?
As he went over to check on the patient, I was watching him to kind of get a cue on what we were going to do next, because we're still determining what the patient's condition was. So I was kind of waiting for him to go check on the patient and then know what to do next.
And at that point in time, when you were standing outside and your partner was approaching the patient, did you see a struggle of any kind going on, any movement, anything like that?
No.
Okay. So after your partner first approached, did you see what he was doing?
Yeah, he checked a pulse on his neck, carotid pulse, and also looked like he checked the patient's pupils.
And did you discuss with your partner at that point next steps?
Yeah, he walked back towards me and I asked, is he in cardiac arrest? And he said, I think so.
So, you use the word cardiac arrest. What does that mean?
It's the term we're going to use for anybody that's not responsive, not breathing, and doesn't have a pulse currently.
Okay. So, essentially, does that mean that someone's heart has stopped?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there multiple things that can cause someone's heart to stop?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So when you say cardiac arrest, you're dealing with a patient whose heart is stopped. Is that an emergency?
Yes.
Okay. So what did you guys, knowing that you had an individual, George Floyd, in cardiac arrest, what did you decide to do?
My partner said, let's just get him in the truck. So I unloaded our stretcher to bring to the patient to place him in the ambulance.
And what was the reason for getting him into the truck?
Yeah. All of our equipment at that point was in the truck for resuscitating the patient. And we also didn't have Minneapolis Fire there yet, which they work with us on critical patients like that and help us a lot. So kind of for resource management, we needed to get in the truck. And then on top of that, there was also a crowd of people that were appeared very upset on the sidewalk, and there was some yelling and stuff, and we, in my mind at least, we also want to get away from that, because running a cardiac arrest, it takes a lot of mental power and focus, and it can be taxing in our ability, so we want to do that in the optimum environment we can. And since the ambulance is right there, we want to be in that controlled space to start resuscitation.
And was part of your reason to move, as you described, to give the best care you could so that you could be focused and away from whatever distractions were happening outside?
Yeah.
And you described hearing people, yelling or loud voices, but was there a physical fight or anything like that happening while you were there?
Not that I saw, no.
Okay. But you decided it would be best for the patient to move to a controlled setting and do your work on the ambulance, is that right?
Yeah, and all of our equipment was there, yeah.
And when you also mentioned fire. Tell me why it's important to have fire assist in a situation like this.
There's just a lot of different skills we're going to be doing on a patient to try to resuscitate them, and we work closely with Minneapolis Fire. They're all EMTs, and they work with us on resuscitating a patient, doing things like breathing for them with like a BVM to help the patient breathe, or do chest compressions and stuff like that.
Okay, so I'm going to break down some of the things you said. You used the term BVM.
Sorry, yeah, it's a thing you squeeze to breathe for your patient, essentially.
To assist with if someone's not breathing, is that a part of the process to try to resuscitate
the
respiration?
Yes.
All right, and we're using the word fire. I assume we're talking about the Minneapolis Fire Department, is that right? And in a lot of people's minds, the fire department fights fires, but you're describing they're also EMTs.
Yeah.
So is it typical for them to assist you with a patient who's in extreme distress or a cardiac arrest or something like that?
Yes, it is.
And you said that there's a lot of work to do. Maybe you could just explain a little bit for the jury why it takes so many people. What's the process that you typically go through when you're trying to resuscitate a patient in that state?
We're doing things like chest compressions to hopefully circulate blood through their body, and you also need to control their airway, so there's some sort of airway has to be placed, and we have to breathe for them. We need to gain vascular access to like an IV or something, so we can give medications to try to resuscitate them, as well as cardiac monitor, which is going to be monitoring a couple different things, but mainly their heart rhythm.
And to do all of those things at the same time, I assume you would need more than one person at least.
Yeah, it's just the more help you have, you can get it done quicker, and kind of running, once you have everything established, it can run much smoother, but that initial part is
So I'm going to direct your attention to May 25th of last year.
Okay.
Were you on duty as a paramedic with Hennepin EMS that date?
Yes, miss.
And did you respond to a call that evening?
Yes, miss.
Just a little bit back. That way, not quite. There you go.
Sorry, sir.
Not a problem. We have to adjust for everybody, so.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. And if you can't hear me, please let me know. And if I can't hear you, I'll let you know.
Thank you, miss.
So getting back to May 25th, what was the initial code or the initial type of call that you understood you were responding to?
We were called Code 2, which means non-emergent, to a mouth injury.
And then at some point en route to that scene, was that call upgraded?
Yes.
And what was the information you had at that time in terms of the upgrade?
At that time, it was Code 3.
And what is Code 3?
Lights and sirens, get there with due regard and as quickly as possible.
And at that point in time, was that all the information you had in terms of first being Code 2 and then Code 3? Not any, did you have any additional information about why it was elevated to a Code 3?
At that time, I had no additional information other than Code 3.
So where did you ultimately respond to that Code 3 call? Was that in the area of 38th in Chicago?
That's correct.
And what did you observe? What did you see when you arrived on scene?
What did I observe when I arrived on scene? It was police squad, an individual laying down, 3 officers on the individual. There was multiple people. There was multiple cell phones out. There was elevated tones used. It didn't feel like a welcoming environment.
So when you arrived, and you said that you saw 3 officers on top of an individual, that individual that they were on top of, was he later identified?
Yes.
And was that individual identified to be George Floyd?
Yes.
So when you come up and you see the scene, 3 officers on top of George Floyd, and you said other individuals with cell phones out, what did you do when you arrived?
What did I do when I arrived on scene? Assessed all corners around us, just gauge what was going on. I walked up to the individual, noticed he wasn't moving. I didn't see any chest rise or fall on this individual. He was in handcuffs at the time. I went up and, sorry.
And when you approached, you said he was in handcuffs. As you approached him to inspect further, were the officers still on top of him?
The officers were still on him when I approached.
And what did you do when you approached?
I was assessing the scene and running through what care may be needed.
And did you take some initial steps, like checking for a pulse?
I checked for a pulse.
And did you also check the individual, Mr. Floyd's, pupils?
I did.
And what did you determine at that point?
They were large, dilated.
So you determined that his pupils were large and dilated. What about a pulse?
I did not palpate a pulse.
And when you say palpate, is that you didn't feel or detect a pulse?
I did not detect a pulse.
And what did his condition appear to be to you overall?
In lay terms, I thought he was dead.
So what did you do next?
I kind of looked for my partner and told him I think he's dead and I want to move this out of here.
Okay.
And I will begin care in the back.
Did you say you would begin care in the back?
In my rig.
And is the rig where your equipment is to deal with something like a cardiac arrest?
Yes, miss.
I'm going to show you something that has not been admitted but has been marked as Exhibit 56. So we'll just show it on your screen at the moment. Do you see that on your screen?
Kind of a glare, but yeah.
Can you see it now if you reposition a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we here, Judge? This? Yeah. I get the gist of it, yeah. That's me touching his carotid artery. There's no pulse.
All right. So you recognize this image is yourself checking for Mr. Floyd's pulse. Is that a fair and accurate picture of that?
Yes, miss.
Your Honor, I would offer Exhibit 56.
Any objection? 56 is received.
And I'd ask to publish it. All right. And I think you just described this as you checking for a carotid pulse. Is that right?
That's correct.
What's a carotid pulse? What does that mean?
The artery in the neck. It's one we check for that. It's closest to the heart. There should be one there if you're up and breathing. So.
Okay. And at the time you're checking for this...
alive. Pardon me?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Or I meant alive. I said breathing. Anyways, go ahead.
So why don't I just circle back to that?
Okay.
You're checking for a carotid pulse. What was your response to that? It would be one that you would find if you were... Please finish your thought.
Repeat that, please.
I apologize.
No, it's on me.
Why do you check the carotid pulse, and what would you expect?
In a living person, there should be a pulse there. I did not feel one. I suspected this patient to be dead.
Okay.
In lay terms.
And at the moment that you're checking for this carotid pulse, are the officers still positioned on top of Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to take down Exhibit 56, and I'm going to put on the screen an exhibit that has already been admitted as Exhibit 248. If we could put that up, please. And then, does this show a different angle of your initial, well, what does this show here? Do you see yourself in this picture?
Yes.
Okay, and what are you doing?
I am at the top of the screen there in that brown uniform.
And you can use this should be a little stylus for your finger to it's a touch screen, so you can just point out where you were.
That's me.
Okay. And what are you doing in this picture?
I think I'm grabbing my flashlight and I'm assessing what's going on here.
Okay. And then in terms of using your flashlight, is that something you use to assist with checking pupils?
Yes, miss.
Okay. So while you were at the head of Mr. Floyd, did you check both his pulse and his pupils?
Yes, miss.
All right. And we can take that down. So at that point, what happened next after you did those things?
After I checked pulse and pupils?
Yes.
I looked for my partner and provided him that I believed the individual to be deceased. I wanted to get off scene, and I would start care in the back.
And did you take steps to make that happen?
Yeah, we grabbed our stretcher, our poles and canvas, and we were starting to prep to move the patient.
And did you have any interaction with the officers in terms of moving the patient?
Once we got the poles and canvas on the ground, the officers were very helpful in moving the patient onto the canvas.
So did the officers assist you in moving
Yes.
the patient? Did you have to provide some direction to them in terms of moving the patient?
Yes, at one point I had to tell one of them to get out of the way. They're in my way.
Okay. And then why was that? What were you trying to accomplish?
I wanted to get my patient to my rig as quickly as possible so I could begin my resuscitation efforts. He was standing in between the stretcher and where I needed to be. He needed to be eliminated from the situation.
Were you you said as quickly as possible. Why were you trying to get things done as quickly as possible?
For my patient care.
And is timing something important when it comes to someone who's in cardiac arrest?
Yes.
And why is that?
His heart isn't beating, and it should be, and the longer it isn't beating, the greater the likelihood this individual will not be resuscitated.
Okay. So, did you ultimately load the patient onto the ambulance?
Yes.
And did you end up, did one of the officers on scene come with you?
We had one officer from Minneapolis, yes.
And why was that?
I needed somebody to start chest compressions.
And when you arrived on scene, did you observe anyone rendering any medical care or chest compressions when you arrived?
When I arrived on scene, there was no medical services being provided to the patient.
Okay. So when you got on the ambulance, did you do some further assessment of Mr. Floyd's condition?
Yes.
And was it at that point that, what did you do next?
We're in the back of the rig.
Yes.
I had them shut the doors. I took the Minneapolis police officer with me. I started to declothe the individual to better assess.
And just a second there, why do you have to do something like that?
To better assess what's going on, to get room to just do my job and provide patient care.
And when you declothe an individual, does that provide further access in terms of any IV or other options for you?
Yes.
Okay. What did you observe at that point as you were doing your initial assessment of Mr. Floyd?
He had some superficial injuries to his face and shoulder, it appeared. I reconfirmed that he was pulseless and wasn't breathing. I had to take the handcuffs off. I had the clothes getting removed so I could prepare to take care of this individual.
And did you personally take off the handcuffs?
Yes, I took off the handcuffs.
How are you able to do that as a paramedic?
I have a pair of handcuff keys.
So in the line of your work, you're able to use those keys to take handcuffs off an individual?
Yes.
And is that the key that you used?
Yes.
And did you provide some additional direction to the law enforcement officer who was with you?
Yes.
And what was the nature of that?
I inquired to the events prior to my arrival, and I also directed him to do chest compressions.